After scoring 24 goals in his comeback for the 1972-73 Baltimore Clippers, the 41-year-old Jimmy Bartlett had earned a bit of rest and relaxation during the offseason. Because Kelly had a full-time job working at Social Security headquarters out in Woodlawn during the day, I was Black Bart's little sidekick, and he took me everywhere. Once he took me to see a Disney movie, but he accidentally bought tickets for the wrong film. So instead, we're at the movies watching The Heartbreak Kid starring Charles Grodin, and I'm like, Dad, I think we're at the wrong movies. He was like, shh, just watch. In the comedy, there's a scene where Grodin's new bride lifts up her shirt and flashes a trucker when the newlyweds are driving to Florida. Now I knew we were definitely at the wrong movie. Where were all the animated mice? This was hardcore pornography as far as I knew, so to my dad's great embarrassment, I started screaming at the top of my lungs in the movie theater, "This is an X! This is an X!" Bartlett's favorite place to take me was the track. Timonian had a racetrack 5 minutes from her apartment in Cockeysville that Jimmy thought was the perfect place to spend a sunny afternoon. I was really young when I wrote my first song. Mr. Jimmy Bartlett going to the racetrack. Listen to the horses going clickety-clickety-clack. Come on, baby, come to the finish line. Then all the money will be mine. Clickety-clack-clack, 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 clickety-clack-clack. Hey, what do you expect, Elton John? I was only a little kid. In the song, Jimmy's horse loses and he knows he's going to get shit from his wife when he gets home. My songwriting was very autobiographical at the time. Now, Jimmy never lost much money playing the ponies. He never bet much. But Kelly would get mad, not because of the money, but because she just thought we spent too much time hanging out at the track. But he didn't go to the track because of the gambling. He just loved watching the horses. Nothing made him happier. Nothing. On May 19, 1973, Jim and Kelly went to the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico. Even though my mom didn't care for the races, this day was special. Former Clipper teammate Jean Gauthier's brother-in-law was the Canadian horse trainer Lucien Lauren, and his horse was the overwhelming favorite after winning the Kentucky Derby in record-breaking time. Prior to the race, Jim and Kelly got a really good close-up look at Big Red in the paddock, and then watched the greatest thoroughbred of all time, Secretariat, capture the second jewel of the Triple Crown. Unlike most of the other Clippers, Bartlett lived in Baltimore year-round. Because of this, Jimmy became friends with many of the team's fans. I remember there was a real big guy named Heimel who used to cook up the best butterflied shrimp, and the adults would all play Michigan Rummy while the kids played Pong upstairs. I remember Ralph and Ginny Shaw. Miss Ginny ran the cotton candy stand at the Clipper games. The Shaws had 3 kids who were about the same ages as me and JJ and Melinda, and they used to have elaborate pool parties. Once a small toddler fell into the pool who couldn't swim. Of course, Bartlett, fully dressed, dove in and saved the drowning child. The Shaws also owned Shaw & Sons Amusements that eventually became one of the largest carnival companies on the East Coast. During the 1970s, my mom and dad actually worked a couple of the Midway games for them at the Maryland State Fair. Ginny would always give me a stack of tickets so I could ride all the rides for free. I won a pet hamster at the carnival that I named Nippy. Once, Nippy escaped from its elaborate habit trail. When we found it in the bathroom, the scared little teddy bear hamster stood on its hind legs and hissed. My mom and I were overcome with laughter when Black Bart, the man who was fearless on the ice, needed to put on thick rubber gloves and fireman boots in order to apprehend the little runaway rodent. When I played Little League during the summer, I played third base and I had a great glove and I could stop everything that was hit my way. Unfortunately, I couldn't hit a baseball to save my life. And after repeatedly striking out, I proved Tom Hanks wrong when he said that there was no crying in baseball. But Bartlett didn't care that I had no athletic ability. He was just proud of the fact that I did well in school. Getting an A on a test impressed him a hell of a lot more than hitting a home run. On June 1st, 1973, a luncheon celebrating the 37 winners of the Evening Sun's High School Prep Athlete Awards was held, which featured football coach Joe Paterno as a guest speaker. Local professional athletes, Oriole center fielder Al Bumbry, Colts running back Lydell Mitchell, Bullets center Wes Unseld, and Clippers left winger Jimmy Bartlett were the VIPs in attendance for the ceremony. Whenever there was an awards banquet, or there needed to be a judge in a beauty pageant, or they needed a local sports celebrity at a charity event, they always called Bartlett. But the best part of every summer for me was that I got to see Melinda and JJ. I was an only child during the spring, winter, and fall, but every year when Bartlett's son and daughter from his first marriage would spend the entire summer with us, I got to have an older brother and sister. Melinda and JJ were always great to me. They never treated me as anyone other than as a full sibling. My mom would carefully plan out each summer, and she would spoil the three of us. Trips to Wildwood, New Jersey, and Ocean City, Maryland, and various amusement parks were always on the agenda. We stayed at the brand new Polynesian Village when Bartlett drove the family from Baltimore to Walt Disney World in Orlando the year after it opened. This was back before they had Space Mountain or even Pirates of the Caribbean. You needed tickets for each ride back then. You needed an E-ticket to visit the Haunted Mansion. An A-ticket would only get you a ride on something like the double-decker bus on Main Street. The ride, if you had wings, was free, and we rode it over and over again because there was never a line and it was air-conditioned. To us, Disney World was the most magical and beautiful place in the world, and Jim and Kelly both fell in love with Florida. Back in Baltimore, we would eat out at restaurants and would play miniature golf, and we were always going to the movies. We would go see the Orioles play at Memorial Stadium, and we would go out for snowballs every night. Melinda had a crush on Donny Osmond, so we all saw the Osmond brothers in concert at the Civic Center. Then we saw the Jackson 5 and the Broadway original cast performance of Jesus Christ Superstar. Every night was family game night, and we were always playing Monopoly or Yahtzee or the Game of Life. Whenever we played Trouble or Sorry, JJ and Melinda would abandon strategy and would always choose just to send each other back. Sorry. During the day, we would all play outside. Around supper time, Bartlett would go outside, put his fingers in his mouth, and would let out this large whistle. No matter where we were or what we were doing anywhere in the neighborhood, we could always hear Bartlett's whistle, and we would immediately start running home. At night, we hunted for lightning bugs. In other words, the summers were absolutely perfect and proved that singer Bryan Adams was right. Those summers were the best days of my life. In 1966, there were only 6 teams in the NHL, but by 1973, the National Hockey League had grown to 16 teams, and the World Hockey Association had an additional 12 teams. This rapid expansion created a demand for young hockey talent, which resulted in much higher wages for the players. Unfortunately, the quality of hockey declined during the early 70s because too many young players were promoted too quickly to the major leagues without first developing their skills playing for years in the minors. This lack of talent resulted in the rise of the goon as hockey became more spectacle than sport. The combination of higher salaries and declining attendance due to the talent drain had a devastating effect on the minor leagues. In 1973, the low-level Eastern League, where Bartlett had played for the Boston Olympics in 1951, folded after 40 years. From its ashes would emerge the North American Hockey League and the Southern Hockey League. In 1972, the Clippers were the only completely independent club in the American Hockey League. Without any support from the NHL, the team was scraping the bottom of the talent barrel. Since all the best prospects were already owned by the NHL and the WHA, the Clippers were comprised of over-the-hill veterans owned by Baltimore and by young players who nobody else wanted. On June 28, 1973, Terry Reardon reached a working agreement with the Detroit Red Wings for the upcoming season. This agreement would not affect the Clippers' independent status. Baltimore would not be a developmental team requiring the team to play a certain amount of young players. The AHL's Tidewater Wings would continue to be Detroit's developmental farm club. Instead, Detroit would simply lend the Clippers some players. On July 5th, it was announced that Jim Morrison would again coach the team. After playing a year with the New York Raiders in the World Hockey Association, Kent Douglas returned to the Clippers and was made captain. Also returning to the team was Howie Menard, who played the previous season for the Salt Lake Golden Eagles of the Western League. Determined to make the Baltimore Clippers the best conditioned team in the AHL, Jim Morrison and Terry Reardon hired former professional boxer and the director of Baltimore's YMCA, Lee Halfpenny. Lee planned to implement a weightlifting program and to have the players work out daily in order to keep them in tip-top physical condition throughout the season. This will be a hustling, aggressive team, Morrison promised, and they'll be in top physical condition. That you can count on. We'll be doing a lot of road work and also some work with weights. Jimmy Bartlett ought to like the road work, Morrison remarked jokingly. I also plan to stress aggressiveness. We had some big guys on the club last year, but they were taking a beating and not giving anything in return. I expect to change that this season. To promote team aggressiveness, Halfpenny also trained the team in combat and taught the players boxing, judo, and karate skills so the Clippers players will be better at fighting on the ice. On the first day of training camp, Clipper trainer Gump Embro distributed white rubber-soled running shoes and new two-piece jumpsuits to the team. After signing for his running shoes and jumpsuit, Bartlett spotted a case of beer in Embro's closet. "Does this go with it?" Black Bart asked playfully, then headed for the door, clutching a pair of six-packs, until he was intercepted by the vigilant trainer. On October 1st, Jim Morrison announced that he was frankly disappointed, primarily with some of the guys who were with us last year. I talked to most of them, and I think they realize what I mean. Nobody was surprised when Morrison cut returning Clippers Mike Mahoney, Bob McMahon, Randy Miller, and Rick Molinaro from the squad. On the next night, the Clippers defeated the defending Central League champions, the Dallas Blackhawks, 3-2 in Baltimore's first exhibition game. Bartlett assisted on Gary Swain's third-period winning goal. According to the Baltimore Sun, although Coach Morrison was disappointed in his team's aggressiveness, two of the hardest workers on the ice were veterans Jim Bartlett and Tony Goigan. However, despite Goigan's best efforts and hard work, Morrison also cut Goigan from the team. And on October 9th, 3 days before the new season was to begin, Jim Morrison cut the player who the Baltimore Sun wrote was easily the most popular player ever to don a Clipper uniform. Jimmy Bartlett produced a spark that no other player had ever produced in Baltimore before him. Everyone knew that when the Clippers needed a goal, everyone knew Bart was the man who could get it. Bartlett was called the king of the garbage goals. According to the Sun, even though it may have been true that Jimmy would let everyone else do all the work and then he would put the puck in the net, nobody was better at beating a goaltender than Bartlett.
"I really thought I could make this team. After all, I scored 24 goals for a bad team last season, and I think they're going to need some goal scorers this season."
When Jimmy's first started his hockey career, he and Morrison played junior hockey together and were teammates on the 1949 Verdun Maple Leafs. Morrison was allegedly jealous of Bartlett because Jimmy used to date Morrison's wife when they were both in high school back in Verdun. Needless to say, Morrison and Bartlett were never the best of friends. Maybe getting rid of Bartlett was personal after all. Jimmy did score 10 goals in the Clippers' final 13 games the previous season and finished the year with 24 goals. Morrison explained his decision. "I realize Jim is strong around the net, but this year we've got a team of young legs who can go 60 minutes every game. I just feel Jim couldn't help us any more than some of these youngsters." Bartlett's spot on the roster was replaced by rookie Dave Gilmour. Since the team was already coached by the singer of The Doors, why not add the guitarist for Pink Floyd? Actually, Dave Gilmour was the older brother of future Hall of Famer Doug Gilmour, who later led the Calgary Flames to their only Stanley Cup. The Clippers were not the only organization to clean house that year. On October 20th, 1973, President Richard Nixon ordered Attorney General Elliot Richardson to fire Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox after he refused President Nixon's request to drop a subpoena for the secretly recorded White House tapes. Richardson refused and resigned immediately. Nixon then ordered Deputy Attorney General William Ruckelshaus to fire Cox, who also refused and resigned. However, the third most senior member of the Justice Department, Solicitor General Robert Bork, carried out Nixon's order and fired the special prosecutor. As a result of this Saturday night massacre, public opinion turned against Nixon, who would eventually resign the following August. After Jimmy was cut from the Clippers in 1971, he was determined to rejoin the team. So he reinstated his amateur status and played for the Columbus Seals in the International League, knowing that a desperate Terry Reardon would eventually call him in need of his services. This time, Bartlett wasn't going to disrupt his life by jumping through a bunch of hoops. He wasn't going to go anywhere. Reardon and Morrison knew where to find him. After the Clippers won only 3 of their first 9 games to start the season, Bartlett was certain that as the season went on and the playoffs got closer, the team would once again need him and the phone would start ringing. On November 7th, Bartlett attended the team's practice at the Orchard Rink and good-naturedly needled his former hockey buddies.
Maybe they'll give me a call. Morrison said he was going this year with youth and speed, but all the speed in the world doesn't do any good if you can't get the puck in the net. The same guys are doing all the scoring. Menard, Dufour, and Rivard.
After Bartlett was let go, they tried to put him on the radio as the team's color commentator with his teammate on the National Brewers softball team, Ron Weber, doing play-by-play. In 2010, Weber would receive the Foster Hewitt Award for Excellence in Hockey Broadcasting, earning him a spot in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Bartlett, on the other hand, was probably the worst color commentator ever allowed on the radio. He was so bad it was funny. He didn't do any prep. He didn't know any of the players on the team. When somebody scored a goal and Weber would prompt Bartlett for a comment, Jimmy could be heard mumbling something like, that was, let's see, number 17. Who is that? Let's see, that's Jerry Kemp. Yeah, Jerry Kemp. He didn't know anything about the players and couldn't pronounce half of their names. He obviously didn't care. Instead, Bartlett just wanted a forum so we could rant about how we should still be part of the Clippers. Needless to say, after a few games, Jimmy Bartlett was out of the booth. Oriole legend Brooks Robinson owned a sporting goods store in Timonium, not too far from the track. Brooks Robinson's sporting goods was unusual because professional athletes headed each department. For instance, if a customer wanted to buy baseball equipment, the salesman was the American League's leader in getting hit by pitches, Oriole outfielder and DH Don Baylor. Although Jimmy knew it wasn't going to be that long before he got another late-season telephone call from a desperate Reardon looking for some scoring help, during the meantime, Bartlett took a job running Brooksy's hockey department. Bartlett became the only pro hockey player in Maryland working in a sporting goods store. However, after Jimmy quit high school to play junior hockey, he was extremely self-conscious about his lack of education. He was far from illiterate. He read the newspaper every day, well, at least the sports page in the local Metro News section. And although he didn't know anything about trigonometry, whenever he was handicapping the races at the track, he turned into Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. But Bartlett basically had a phobia about handling other people's money, and he was intimidated by the idea of filling out any sort of paperwork or sales contracts. As a result, Bartlett didn't last too long at Brooks Robinson's. Jimmy knew he could never work in an office. He was strictly a blue-collar kind of guy. "We need you, Bart." He waited all winter for that phone call from Reardon. Jimmy Bartlett had the headline already written in his head. 2 years ago, Bartlett did it. Can he do it again? But the phone never rang for Jim Bartlett. Morrison's plan to completely transform the Baltimore Clippers was an overwhelming success. After having the worst record in the American Hockey League, the 1973-74 Baltimore Clippers team finished in first place in the league's new Southern Division. The Clippers finished the season with 42 wins and 94 points, the most in franchise history. Mark Dufour broke the Clippers' single-season scoring record with 104 points and was named the second-team All-Star. Howie Menard and Bobby Rivard both had the best seasons of their careers. Rivett finished with 92 points and scored 36 goals, while Menard had 81 points and scored 42 times. Rookie Dave Gilmore and returning winger Brian Murphy each had 30 goals. During the season, Bobby Rivard broke all of the Clippers' all-time records. He broke Sandy McGregor's record for games played, Willie Marshall's record for assists and points, and Jimmy Bartlett's record for all-time Clipper goals. Although the Clippers easily defeated the Richmond Robins in 5 games in the first round of the playoffs, they were swept in 4 games in the second round by the Hershey Bears. However, despite the team's success, Clippers attendance was way down. The average attendance of a Clippers game in 1973 was only about half the size of the crowds from 1969, the year that Bartlett had led the team in scoring. Jimmy was given some offers to play hockey for the Winston-Salem Solar Twins and the Charlotte Checkers in the Southern League, the league that rose from the ashes of the old Eastern League. According to the Baltimore Sun, these were teams that expansion had reduced to clots of not too good youngsters and much too old veterans. Bartlett considered the offers, but Kelly put her foot down. Jimmy told the Sun,
"She's satisfied that I'm home every night, and we didn't want to move. She makes good bread out at Social Security. Sometimes I'll tell her, I'm going, and she'd say, no, you're not. Terry did you a favor by cutting you. He let you go after a good year."
Jimmy also received an offer to coach in Switzerland. Although it would have been nice living in Geneva, Kelly thought it was too big of a risk for all of us to move to a foreign country.
"I can still play. Maybe when I'm 50 or 60, I'll go down to the games and still say I can play."
Jimmy told the Sun that if he wanted to keep playing, he was sure
Terry would phone one team or 100 to help me out. At my age, I don't think anybody else would have kept me playing. But then again, sometimes I kid my wife and tell her that, hey, Terry called.
The national headquarters of the Social Security Administration is not in Washington, D.C. It's in Woodlawn, a suburb of Baltimore. Kelly had worked at national headquarters for Social Security since 1960. She was in the Office of Training and had the title of Employee Development Specialist. She would design management training courses from scratch and would then travel the country teaching these classes to the uppermost echelon of managers in the federal government. It was now Kelly's turn to go out on the road while Bartlett stayed home to look after me. I remember staying at home with my dad while my mom was teaching in Dallas, San Francisco, and Albuquerque. I will always remember the 6 weeks she spent in Manhattan. I remember eating craft dinner with Bartlett, and he allowed me to stay up past my normal bedtime each night, and the two of us would watch TV together. I remember it was World War II week on television, and I watched 3 of my all-time favorite movies for the first time with Bartlett: The Bridge on the River Kwai, The Great Escape, and The Dirty Dozen. We took the train up to visit my mom in New York. We saw the Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall, visited Madison Square Gardens, and went to the top of the Empire State Building. When my dad picked me up and held me in the air on the observation deck so I could see better, I was absolutely terrified that he was going to drop me. A year ago, Bartlett was a beloved local sports hero. Now he was unemployed. He was over 40, without an education, without money, and 24 years of work experience playing ice hockey wasn't the most marketable of skills to list on a resume. Although he wasn't Italian, Bartlett knew people who knew people, and he was approached by someone with certain connections with the job proposal. All Jimmy had to do was sit in an office and answer the phone and write down bets. Easy peasy. But Bartlett knew that eventually he would be asked to do something that he didn't want to do, and he would not be allowed to say no. So Bartlett politely declined the offer. After years of living in the limelight, Jimmy Bartlett was now going to have to learn how to just be a working stiff. Fortunately, Jimmy was able to get hired by the National Brewing Company.
It's the National Troubadour!
At the sound of the whistle of the batonier, the parade begins with a thundering cheer. It's a thrilling sight to all the people here on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay. The calliope sounds out very clear, and he plays loud enough to curl your ear. The drum and the cymbal are well known here on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay.
Happy occasions call for quality national beer. Quality that demands the finest grains, the purest water, the utmost patience in brewing and aging. You can tell by the taste. Light, refreshing, national beer.
Since Bartlett first came to Baltimore in 1966, he worked during the summers delivering beer on a beer truck. Now he would actually be working at the brewery itself, which was an excellent union job, potentially making more money than he ever did playing hockey. National Beer's premium beer was appropriately named National Premium, and they also made Colt 45 malt liquor. But their most popular product by far, especially with the blue-collar population of Baltimore, was National Bohemian, which was affectionately known as Natty Bo. Loyalty was very important to Bartlett. His loyalty to Phil Watson ended his time with the Rangers. He felt personally betrayed when the Reds traded him to Baltimore, and he was fiercely loyal to the Clippers. Jimmy immediately became a loyal employee of the brewery. He brought home boxes and boxes of promotional t-shirts and ball caps, and our whole family was transformed into a walking advertisement for the National Brewing Company. At first, Jimmy worked in the brew house making the beer. He never worked in the bottle shop like you see on Laverne and Shirley, but most of the time he worked in the warehouse where he drove a forklift that he called a tow motor. In the 1960s, the American Hockey League and the Western Hockey Leagues planned to merge and challenge the NHL and become hockey's second major league. However, in 1974, because of the weakening of the minor leagues, because of the rapid expansion of the NHL, the once great Western Hockey League announced that it had folded. That summer, Jimmy's friend and Clipper season ticket holder Morris Barsotti told Jimmy that the best house in his neighborhood was for sale. So we bought that house in Kearney, a northeast suburb of Baltimore, and we moved away from Cockeysville. When we lived in Kearney, Jimmy would sometimes hang out at the auto parts store that Morris owned, where his two sons Stevie and David worked. Although Bartlett was friends with Morris, he eventually became closer with Morris's two sons because after years of playing hockey, Jimmy was always more comfortable with younger people than people his own age. Because Kelly actually preferred the house of our next-door neighbors because of the huge family room in the remodeled basement, we sold the house a couple years later and literally bought and moved into the house next door. The Baltimore Sun reported on July 12, 1974, that Bartlett had received playing and scouting offers from the World Hockey Association and a possible coaching position in the Southern League.
I mean, Gordie Howe made a comeback, and he made out well. What's wrong with old JB doing the same?
Jimmy definitely wanted to play hockey again, but he only wanted to play for one team, Baltimore. We had just bought a house, and we definitely weren't moving. All other teams were out of the question. On August 5, 1974, the smoking gun tape was released which proved that Nixon obstructed the Watergate burglary investigation. After being told by Republican congressional leadership that impeachment was imminent, President Richard Nixon announced during a television address that he was resigning at noon on August 9, 1974, and that Vice President Ford would be sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. Stu Hyatt was a mechanical engineer for Westinghouse who also ran Chesapeake Sporting Goods, and he loved ice hockey more than anything in the world. Stu Hyatt was 35 years old in 1968 when he convinced the National Brewing Company to sponsor a local amateur hockey team, and the National Brewers were born. Stu invited Sam Mattingly to the team's first practice. Sam was a former high school player and coach for Calvert Hall. After the team warmed up for about 10 minutes, Sam learned that he had been appointed coach of the team when Stu skated over to him and asked, "What do you want to do now?" Stu Hyatt was the team's leading scorer in the Brewers' first season. Everyone who had seen the movies The Right Stuff or Apollo 13 knows the high number of tests and simulations that the scientists at NASA put our astronauts through during the race to the moon. However, NASA failed to give the astronauts any training at all prior to the first two EVAs or spacewalks. After Ed White complained about problems with maneuverability on Gemini 4 and Eugene Cernan became exhausted and overheated on Gemini 9, Houston realized it had a serious problem. Doing simple tasks in zero gravity was difficult. Fortunately for the space program, Sam Mattingly had previously formed a tiny company named Environmental Research Associations, Inc., which had invented neutral buoyancy training to simulate zero gravity. Sam had a rental arrangement for the use of the swimming pool at the McDonough Military School, where he submerged a mock-up of the NASA Langley airlock and recruited college-age scuba hobbyists to serve as test subjects and safety divers. Edwin Buzz Aldrin was the first astronaut who NASA required to undergo Sam Mattingly's training program in the McDonough swimming pool in Baltimore. After receiving his training on November 13, 1966, Buzz Aldrin became the first astronaut to successfully work in space without tiring during Gemini 12, the last Gemini mission. The first photograph ever taken of a recognizable face in outer space was a selfie taken by Buzz Aldrin during his successful EVA. In the picture, Buzz shows the camera a handwritten thank you note which said, "To Sam, with many thanks and best wishes, Buzz Aldrin." Jimmy returned to the National Brewers hockey team for the 1974-75 season. Most of the other players on the Brewers roster were either teenagers or in their early 20s. Sam's two sons were both on the team. Dave Mattingly was a forward who had led the Brewers in scoring in 1972. Other key players for the Brewers were Steve Bachman, John Cotter, Tom McLaughlin, Mickey McBee, Steve Brown, Roger Forrest, and George Bacharach. Randy Mattingly was a defenseman. It was Randy who had the original idea to approach Bartlett to see if he would be willing to join the club after he quit the Columbus Seals in 1971. Joining Randy on the blue line was Steve Worth. The Brewers also had the best goalie in the Chesapeake League, Jerry Horak. After Bartlett agreed to join the team, he told his teammates,
"We'll never lose another fucking game."
The National Brewers were undefeated in their 20-game regular season that year, scoring 181 goals and allowing only 43. Black Bart led the Chesapeake League in scoring with 27 goals and 25 assists. The National Brewers crushed the Columbia Flyers 10-1 in the championship game to capture the Gertler Cup. After winning the championship, the Brewers then beat the Chesapeake All-Stars by a 5-4 score. Meanwhile, after a record-breaking year, the Baltimore Clippers had high expectations for the 1974-75 season. However, after 46 games, the Clippers were in dead last place with only 38 points. Because of low attendance and rising costs, on January 23, 1975, Clipper owner Zanvil Krieger made the shocking announcements that the Baltimore Clippers franchise had folded. The team wasn't even going to finish the season. Rivard would finish the year playing with his old club, the Fort Wayne Comets, in the International League, and would play one season of senior hockey before retiring. After Mark Dufour was drafted and signed by the New York Raiders of the World Hockey Association, he chose to remain with Baltimore after Terry Reardon convinced him to turn down a much more lucrative salary by arguing that the WHA was a new unproven league and couldn't provide the same job security as remaining with the Clippers would. After the Clippers folded, Mark Dufour would never play another game. On the next day, the Michigan Stags of the World Hockey Association also folded. So the league created the Baltimore Blades and relocated the franchise to Charm City to finish the season. Major League Hockey was finally coming to Baltimore. The Baltimore Blades played its first home game on February 2, 1975 against the Houston Aeros, which featured 46-year-old Gordie Howe playing with his sons Mark and Marty. A couple of old Clippers were on the Baltimore Blades, Larry Johnston and Fred Speck. The team also had forward Goldie Goldthorpe. Goldthorpe was the inspiration for Ogie Oglethorpe in the classic hockey comedy Slapshot. After relocating to Baltimore, the Blades lost their first 8 games. The team had scored only 10 goals during that time and hadn't scored at all in their last 142 minutes. Switching to the World Hockey Association did not improve attendance at the Civic Center, and the crowds were much smaller than the Clippers drew during the 1960s. Jimmy spoke to Skip Feldman, the Blades vice president, about how he thought he could help the team. Because he still had a fan base, Jimmy thought that if he joined the team, he could help boost attendance.
If a few thousand paid their $6.50 to see me once, they might like what they see and come back to see the team itself.
Bartlett didn't need to sign a big contract. Instead, he could just appear in some home games.
If Hal can skate every shift at 46, I can sure skate every other shift.
Skip Feldman said he tried without success the very thing Bartlett had in mind when he was running the World Hockey Association's San Diego Mariners. The Gulls were San Diego's minor league team and pretty popular. People kept saying to me, bring in some ex-Gulls to draw people, so we did. It didn't help. When he was asked specifically if Bartlett could help his struggling team,
Bartlett couldn't help this mess out there, he grumbled.
More seriously, he added, if he couldn't make the American Hockey League, how could he make this club? The Baltimore Blades finally won their first game on February 20th. During the game, the goal judge, Joe Brosiker, indicated the first period score, but play continued and no one argued until the referee finally blew his whistle and disallowed the goal. Brosiker and Jimmy Bartlett visited the press box at the end of the first period.
"You missed that one," Bartlett told him. "If it had gone in, I would have told you."
When the Winnipeg Jets came to town, my dad took me to the dressing room and introduced me to his old friend, Bobby Hall, who played with Bartlett in 1959 when the Rangers toured Europe. He was going to sign a stick for me, but I preferred Joe Daly's goalie stick, which was signed by both the Winnipeg goaltender and the Golden Jet. At the end of the season, the Baltimore Blades also folded after playing 35 games, winning only 8. After thousands of Americans were first evacuated by helicopter on April 30th, 1975, the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon fell to the communist Viet Cong, finally ending the Vietnam War. When Jimmy Bartlett was asked by the Baltimore Sun why he was still playing for the National Brewers at the ripe old age of 43, Jimmy said,
"It helps keep my mind off of growing old."
The Brewers were becoming so popular that about 200 fans would attend their games with admission costing 50 cents. The Brewers again dominated the Chesapeake League during the 1975-76 season. The team finished with an 18-1-1 season, with the team's only loss occurring against the Junior Clippers. Dave Mattingly was the league's leading scorer, and Randy was voted the league's best defenseman. Bartlett scored twice in the championship game as the Brewers defeated the Columbia Flyers 7-3. After the Blades folded, Terry Reardon contacted the Clippers' former team physician and investor, Dr. Ross Pierpont, with the hope of having the Clippers return to Baltimore. After new principal owner Pierpont formed a limited partnership with 25 backers, each putting up $10,000, and the Clippers boosters pre-sold 1,700 season tickets, the American Hockey League awarded Baltimore a new franchise for the 1975-1976 season. Of course, Baltimore's Mr. Hockey, Terry Reardon, was put in charge of building the team. Kent Douglas served as the Clippers' player coach. In order to control costs, the maximum salary for players was $11,000, which was equivalent to about $65,000 in 2024 dollars. In that year's Clipper program, there was a Clipper nostalgia quiz that asked fans to identify the various Clippers in numerous photos. In the picture showing Black Bart, the program described Jimmy as the most popular Clipper ever. National Brewers defenseman 21-year-old Steve Worth was given a tryout with the team. According to coach Kent Douglas, "I've seen him play at Orchard, and it remains to be seen whether he'll be good enough to make our club. One thing I do know is that he's one tough bugger. I don't think the kid has enough sense to be afraid of anybody, and you've got to admire him for that." Jimmy Bartlett, who had been tutoring Worth on the finer points, offered him this advice.
"I told him if he wanted to make the club, we'll have to stir things up at training camp."
Worth would skate in 2 regular season games for the 1975-76 Clippers. In his final year as a pro, Fred Speck returned to the club and led the team in scoring. Howie Menard scored 7 goals in 38 games in his final AHL season before retiring to coach senior hockey. After getting shut out in 2 consecutive games by Richmond, Jimmy Bartlett predicted before Baltimore's next game against Hershey that,
"I think you can expect to see a big fight on the ice shortly. There's only so much of this you can take before it gets to you."
The 1975-76 Clippers finished in last place with the worst record in the American Hockey League. When Bartlett worked at the brewery, he never worked a normal daytime shift. When I was in elementary school, he normally worked a 3 to 11 shift, which is why he would be the one to get me ready for school each day. We would watch the Three Stooges and Little Rascals each morning on Channel 45. Kelly had no idea why Bartlett would randomly ask me if I heard about the guy who killed the guy on Guy Street, or if I knew Charlie who walks like this. Women just couldn't get the Three Stooges. His favorite episode of the Little Rascals was the one with the International Silver String Submarine Band. Jimmy made good money at the brewery and the benefits were great, plus he was able to work tons of overtime. Of course, he bragged to me that he broke the brewery's record for hours worked in a week. And it was really cool that he used to bring home free beer all the time. But because it was a union job, until he earned seniority, he was constantly being laid off from work whenever the company slowed down production, or the union would go on strike. Bartlett would then have to go on unemployment or work construction until the brewery called him back. I remember that he partnered up with an African-American guy named Dwayne to hang drywall together. They were a good partnership. Dwayne was very skilled and taught Bartlett everything he knew about hanging board. Jimmy was a quick learner and hard worker, but more importantly, because he was white, he could get jobs that Dwayne couldn't get by himself. Kelly was the family breadwinner during the entire marriage, and she was definitely the boss. She had complete control over the Bartlett family finances. She paid all the bills, did the family taxes, she obtained all the credit, and handled the savings. She was able to somehow pay for me to go to private school and for college. Kelly definitely called the shots. She made all the major decisions and made all the major purchases. She planned all the trips. She bought all of the cars. She even bought the houses. Jimmy hated responsibility and was more than happy to just defer to his wife's judgment. There were some stretches during Jimmy's layoffs at the brewery where no jobs were available, so Bartlett had to collect unemployment. During this time, Jimmy enthusiastically assumed the role and even proclaimed himself a house husband. He did all the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry. Kelly's mother, my Nana, even gave Bartlett a sewing machine one Christmas. Every year he would hem my pants and he would turn old jeans into cutoffs for the summer. Jimmy just acquiesced and acted like he couldn't care less when Kelly made the major decision to sell her house in order to move to the one next door. But man, we would hear it if the mayonnaise wasn't properly returned to the designated place in the refrigerator. Even when Jimmy wasn't laid off, my parents still reversed their traditional marital roles, and he still performed most of the duties of the house husband. When he worked the 11 to 7 overnight shift, he was able to be home with me when I got home from school. I remember watching a rerun of Gilligan with him one afternoon when we got a phone call which caused me to see my father cry for the very first time. He had learned that his mother Lily, with her sweet British accent, had passed away. Brewers founder Stu Hyatt quit the Brewers for the 1976-1977 season in order to play for the Baltimore Bruins, a new Chesapeake League team. Dave Mattingly missed most of the season because he was playing college hockey at Northeastern University, and Randy Mattingly broke his wrist. Nevertheless, the Brewers were still able to squeak out a regular season victory. Bartlett led the Chesapeake League in scoring once again with 30 goals and 34 assists in 30 games. The National Brewers defeated the Baltimore Blazers 6-4 in the finals to claim a fourth consecutive playoff crown. Bartlett then had 6 assists as the Brewers defeated the Chesapeake League All-Star team 11-3 in the season's finale. After finishing in last place and losing $250,000, Clipper owner Ross Pierpont announced that the team would be dropping out of the American Hockey League and would instead play in the low-level Southern Hockey League for the 1976-1977 season in order to save money. On September 17, 1976, Terry Reardon was fired by the Clippers because they could no longer afford to pay him. Bartlett continued to attend most of the Clippers' home games and would spend his time pacing back and forth in the upper concourse. Jimmy again pitched the idea that he would play the remainder of the Clippers' home games. Clipper president Jim Watson liked the idea, but told the press that he had made a commitment with the team's coach and general manager, Larry Wilson, that he would make all final decisions on the ice. On January 6, 1977, Jimmy told the Baltimore Sun,
I was going to ask them to work out with the team this week, but now I don't even know if there's going to be a team to work out with. I'm just sick to see hockey die in this city. It might never come back if it goes.
The Southern Hockey League ceased operations less than a month later on January 31st when 4 of the league's teams folded. Like that, the Baltimore Clippers were gone. Kelly's boss at work used to run the Miss Maryland beauty pageant each year. Each county in Maryland and Baltimore City would have its own individual pageants, and the winners would compete for the title of Miss Maryland, who would then move on to Atlantic City with the hope of being crowned Miss America. In 1977, Kelly was somehow bamboozled by her boss into running the Miss Baltimore County pageant. The event was a massive project. Kelly had to find the contestants and sponsors willing to donate scholarships for the winners. She had to find an auditorium to host the event, a master of ceremonies to serve as host, someone to run the lights, someone to run the sound, someone to choreograph an opening dance production, photographers, florists. The Miss Baltimore County pageant featured a talent portion of the show. One girl played classical piano and another played the flute. There was an opera singer, a couple of ballerinas, and a ventriloquist, plus a whole bunch of other singers and dancers of various genres. All of that needed to be coordinated. There were multiple rehearsals. Kelly also needed to design and get advertisers for the printed program, plus find local celebrities to serve as judges. She had to print up the tickets and advertise and promote the event, and she had to supervise and deal with all of the girls and their mini dramas and about a million other things, and then afterwards she had to chaperone and prepare the winner for the Miss Maryland pageant, which was held each year in Hagerstown. I have no idea how she was able to pull it off. My mom conducted research into the competition by dragging Bartlett and me to a countless number of other pageants in the various counties. Bartlett, of course, helped my mom and as always did everything she asked him to do. Plus, he had no problem flirting with all the young, pretty contestants. Our pageant was hosted by the reigning Miss Maryland, who gave me a sweet little kiss on the lips backstage on the night of the pageant. Despite being a pretty mediocre dancer, our pageant was won by 18-year-old Linda Lambert. Lambert would lose the Miss Maryland pageant to a blonde who twirled the baton in a cheesy performance to the theme of Rocky. Unlike the Miss America contest, Miss USA didn't judge for talent. In 1981, Linda Lambert would win Miss Maryland and would make it to the semifinals in the Miss USA beauty pageant that year. The scene in the movie Goodfellas with the long tracking shot reminds me of my childhood. Wise guys don't wait in line or wait for a table. On their very first date, Ray Liotta impresses Lorraine Bracco when they enter through the back door and kitchen of the Copa, and then the maitre d' sets up a new table for the couple and gives them the royal VIP treatment. That's pretty much how I remember going to the Baltimore Civic Center. We never needed tickets or had to wait in line. I never even seen the front of the Civic Center. Instead, we always came in through the press entrance in the back door. All the reporters would pull out their IDs and would say, "Press," when entering the turnstiles. Bartlett would always reference an old Three Stooges gag by instead saying, "Pull," yuck, yuck, yuck. It was always the same gag. Soon as we gained entrance, Bartlett would then get sworn by various ushers who would promise to find seats for us right down front. I saw my first rock concert at the Civic Center when we saw Three Dog Night. And every year we would see the circus when it came to town, and the Ice Follies, and the Ice Capades, and Disney on Ice. The ushers always made sure that I was always picked to be part of the show. I was always one of those kids who they would choose to ride the elephant while they waved to the crowd. Jimmy had just turned 45, and I guess he was feeling bored. So on May 29th, 1977, at the spur of the moment, Bartlett said, "Hey, let's go see Elvis." So the two of us drove to the Civic Center to see the King of Rock and Roll in concert. Barricades were set up outside of the Clippers locker room, which Elvis used as his dressing room. Of course, because the Civic Center was Bartlett's house, he just ignored the barricades, and the two of us were free to go wherever we wanted to go. Bartlett and I stood right out front of Elvis's dressing room, just like we were some of Elvis's bodyguards. Screaming women standing behind the barricades pleaded with me and my dad, "Can you pass on a message to Elvis? I have a gift for Elvis." I don't remember anyone actually throwing me their panties, but I wouldn't have been at all surprised. Something was obviously wrong with Elvis that night. This was the fat Elvis at his absolute worst, and the concert was memorable for being one of the worst of his entire career. After a completely lethargic Elvis finally hit the stage following the warm-up acts, he performed for only about 30 minutes before he suddenly announced that he had to leave the stage and abruptly walked off. His large stage entourage was forced to go into ad-lib mode. One of the backup singers sang some opera and some members of the band played a few songs to stall for time. Finally, Elvis came back about a half hour, 45 minutes later, and explained in a slurred, mumbling voice that nature calls and you don't fool around with nature. Elvis sang for only about another 20 minutes, leaving the Baltimore crowd disappointed but concerned for his health. Rumors circulated that Elvis had a stomach ache because he ate too many fried banana sandwiches before the show. Although he told the audience that there was nothing wrong with my health, it was later confirmed that Elvis was on medication and was being treated by a doctor during the 30-minute gap. His publicist blamed the lackluster performance on an intestinal problem that had allegedly plagued Elvis throughout the tour. After his disastrous Baltimore performance, Elvis canceled his tour's next 4 concert dates. On August 16, 1977, while we were staying in Ocean City, breaking news was announced that the king of rock and roll had died. My brother JJ was a big fan of Elvis, and he cried when he heard the news during the broadcast. In the movie Austin Powers, Dr. Evil cloned a miniature version of himself that he named Mini-Me. I think Bartlett did the same thing with JJ. I never knew the young Jimmy Bartlett, but in a way I feel like I did because Jay was a carbon copy of our dad. He looked exactly like him as a kid. JJ also had the same cocky swagger. Like Bartlett, Jay didn't do well in school. He was really small for his age, so like Bartlett, he always felt more comfortable with younger kids rather than those his own age. JJ was the best athlete in the neighborhood, and he was the fastest kid in the neighborhood, and he could outfight the other kids. He didn't have to because everyone loved Jay. During the school year, I was a loner and was thought of as just some outcast. But not during the summer. JJ was the most popular kid in the neighborhood, and the other kids couldn't wait for him to come to town each year. And Jay made sure that the other kids were nice to his kid brother. So each year during the summer, I actually got to hang out with the cool kids. And nobody was cooler than JJ. He reminded me of Kelly Leak, the motorcycle riding, cigarette smoking, Tatum O'Neal dating, home run slugging star of the Bad News Bears baseball team. JJ was easily the most charismatic person I ever met in my entire life. With his New England accent, all the girls in the neighborhood had a crush on him, and so did their mothers. He would compliment the mothers like a real-life Eddie Haskell. "That's a lovely dress you're wearing, Mrs. Cleaver." But he never came off as fake or insincere. Instead, they ate it up and were completely charmed. Jay always tried his best to beat Bartlett, but he could never do it. Whether it was playing miniature golf or ping pong or throwing darts, JJ would always try his hardest to beat the old man, but would always come up just a little bit short. Whenever Bartlett and I picked up JJ from the airport, my dad liked to hide behind a pillar and would whistle for JJ when he got off the plane. JJ would be looking all around for the source of the whistling, while Bartlett would just be hiding and then would start laughing loudly. I used to play the drums while JJ used to pretend to be Mike Love of the Beach Boys when he would sing along to the album Endless Summer with a microphone that we had plugged into an amplifier. Once we invited the kids of the neighborhood over to our house for a little concert, and I performed my original songs, Bongo Bongos and Friday Is My Day. Towards the end of the summer, JJ told Bartlett that he did not want to return home to Rhode Island, but wanted to live in Baltimore with us year-round. Jim and Kelly said they would love for him to stay, but it was all up to his mother, Helen. Helen said that if JJ really wanted to live with his father, she would respect his wishes. We were all excited to have JJ come live with us full-time, but at the last moment, JJ got homesick and had a change of heart. Bartlett was devastated when JJ chose to return to Providence. Prior to the Brewers' 1977-1978 season, the National Brewing Company merged with the Carling Brewing Company to become the Carling National Brewery. As a result, the hockey team's name was changed from the National Brewers to the Tuborg Brewers in order to promote the company's premium Danish lager. On January 9, 1978, the Baltimore Clippers' final possessions were auctioned off to pay off creditors. Overseeing the team's last rites were former Clippers Jill Boisvert and Jimmy Bartlett. Everything was gathered pathetically in the team's old office, from racks of ragged underwear to a framed picture of Gump Embro and Jacques Palant to the coffee cup Terry Reardon used during his long tenure as coach and general manager. Bartlett attended in order
to see how things are, to see some of my old equipment disappear.
Everything was sold, including Jimmy's old Clippers uniform that was auctioned off to a young fan who played hockey in the Capital Beltway League. The Brewers had a challenging season when they were forced to add 8 newcomers between the ages of 16 and 18 as replacements to replace the many core players who left during the team during the offseason. After Randy Mattingly broke his arm during the season, Black Bart ended up anchoring the 4-man defense with 3 17-year-old rookies. Even though Bartlett was the oldest player in the league at 46, Sam Mattingly told The Sun, "Bartlett is still the best player in the league. He can still make moves that baffles me." Although the Brewers finished 1 point behind the Orchard Mercuries for second place in the regular season, on March 20th, 1978, the two Brewers defeated the Mercuries 4-2 in the playoffs to win their 5th straight championship in Jimmy Bartlett's final season. When Bartlett learned that I was getting bullied on the bus ride to school, he had a quick solution. When the bus picked me up the next morning, Bartlett got on the school bus and he threatened the other children.
Anyone who has a problem with Stevie has got a problem with me.
At first I thought the bullying would get worse, but I later learned from a friend that Bartlett's threats actually terrified the other children. Bartlett loved to go to parades and he used to drag us to every one of them. He loved the bands and the floats and everybody just marching down the street. And he liked to make fun of the guy who used to chase the fire engines. But he liked it even better when he got to be in the parade. I remember on a chilly day sitting next to my dad on the back of the convertible while waving to the crowds like I was some sort of celebrity. It was cool because before the parade began, when everyone is gathered at the start, I was able to briefly, playfully shadowbox a fighter who had turned pro after winning the Olympics 2 years earlier, named Sugar Ray Leonard. I also met and said hello to the co-host of the local Baltimore morning show People Are Talking, who was in her own celebrity convertible named Oprah Winfrey. Jimmy appeared in a really cute television commercial that summer for the Special Olympics. Black Bart, Brooks Robinson, and Johnny Unitas all played fans who were asking a kid with Down syndrome to sign their autograph books. Even though Jimmy's playing days were finally over after he led the Brewers to their 5th consecutive championship, he worked as a linesman in the Chesapeake League for the 1978-1979 season. That summer, my parents bought a mobile home in Ocean City, Maryland. Jimmy also bought his famous Disney-themed bicentennial van. Every Friday, we would cram ourselves into the Mickey Mouse van and would take a 3.5-hour road trip to the beach on Friday and a 3.5-hour road trip back home every Sunday. Even though Bartlett built a bed in the back of the van, and I would sleep or listen to Casey Kasem's Top 40 Countdown, the trip was long and brutal because the van didn't have any air conditioning. My parents were good friends with our neighbors in the Ocean City trailer park, Chuck and Pam, and were the godparents for their son Mark. Millie, who was one of my mom's oldest friends and worked with Kelly at Social Security, also had a mobile home in the same park with her husband Bud, and she and my mom would compete each summer for the darkest tan. Millie's daughter Ramona had a crush on Doug Barry when she used to babysit me back in Cockeysville. Cherry Reardon was finally proven right when the World Hockey Association folded after the 1978-79 season. World Hockey's Edmonton Oilers, Winnipeg Jets, Hartford Whalers, and Quebec Nordiques would all join the NHL the following year. Even though I was no longer getting bullied on the school bus, I still wasn't popular, and I was forced to fight one kid named Mel who hated me for some reason after school. Basically, a group of 5 boys gave me an ultimatum. If I didn't fight them, they would all beat me up. I had no choice. A mob of kids gathered around for the big fight that took place in a field by the woods. I didn't try to box, and I ignored all concepts of defense. I told myself to ignore any pain, and I immediately went into berserker mode. I made a beeline towards him and swarmed him by throwing as many punches as I could as quickly as possible. He gave me a bloody nose, but it didn't slow me down. Remembering what Bartlett told me, I repeatedly punched him in his ear over and over again until he dropped to the ground, and then he eventually quit. The next day at school, he looked like a raccoon. After he quit the fight, I ran home as quickly as I could because I knew the other little bastards would try to jump me. When I got home and Bartlett saw my war wounds, he couldn't be prouder. He smiled and called me Rocky. After a 2-year absence, the Baltimore Clippers returned to the ice on September 12, 1979, when a group of 22 businessmen named the Baltimore Hockey Advocates was granted an expansion team to play in the low-level Northeastern Hockey League, which then changed its name to the Eastern League. This new Eastern League consisted of the Erie Blades, the Richmond Rifles, the Utica Mohawks, and the Hampton Aces. The Clippers were coached by Gene Ubriaco, who briefly played with them on a line with Bartlett in 1967 before he was called up to the expansion Pittsburgh Penguins. I was obsessed with baseball in 1979 and followed the Orioles religiously that year. On October 17, 1979, my folks and I were at Memorial Stadium and saw the Pittsburgh Pirates defeat the Orioles in Game 7 of the World Series after Willie Stargell smacked a 2-run homer in the 6th inning off of Scott McGregor. We were sitting right behind Rick Dempsey's family at the game, and they were crying their eyes out. The packed stadium silently watched the Pittsburgh team celebrate on the field to the sounds of Sister Sledge's "We Are Family." Talk about depressing. On November 4, 1979, a group of radicalized Iranian college students in support of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Iranian Revolution seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 53 American hostages who they would hold for 444 days. By this time, I was attending Calvert Hall, which was a private Catholic high school located in Towson. Because of a massive layoff at the brewery, Bartlett was forced to take a job for a restoration and remodeling company where he worked as a cleanup laborer hauling rubble in a truck to the local dump. Many of the students at Calvert Hall were rich little assholes, including the son of the owner of the company where Jimmy was temporarily working. Bartlett loved the fact that I played drums in the school's marching band, and he cheerfully transported the band's drums to the parades and football games in his Mickey Mouse van. In the fall of 1980, it was my turn to be in the spotlight for a change at a professional sporting event when the Calvert Hall Marching Band performed at halftime for a Colts football game. It was really cool because as the feature performer, my Ludwig drum set was set up at the 50-yard line in front of the band, and I was able to play Wipeout before thousands of Baltimore fans at Memorial Stadium. Although Jimmy was normally non-political, I remember when Bartlett learned that my biology teacher had passed out a bunch of anti-abortion propaganda in class, and he launched into a surprising rant at home about how stupid it was for the government to tell women what to do with their bodies. When we are teenagers, we think of ourselves as immortal. For me, that illusion was shattered on the morning of December 9th, 1980, when my mother woke me up to tell me the devastating news that John Lennon had been murdered the night before in New York. The death of John Lennon had a profound impact on me. For the first time, I realized if my hero can die, so can I. I was bummed out on March 3rd, 1981 because my best buddy went to see the band Cheap Trick at the Civic Center that night with a group of friends, and I felt left out because nobody asked me if I wanted to go. When I told my dad why I was in a bad mood and I was feeling sorry for myself, he told me, "Hey, fuck these guys. If you want to see Cheap Trick, I'll take you to see Cheap Trick." We hopped into the van and arrived at the Civic Center early enough to watch the band conduct its sound check. We didn't need tickets. As always, we just walked right in. Bartlett never heard of the band, but he actually loved Cheap Trick, especially the lead guitarist Rick Nielsen, who he kept calling Satch. Not because he reminded him of the great guitar shredder Joe Satriani, who was nicknamed Satch, but because Rick Nielsen's entire stage persona seemed to be completely based on Jimmy's old friend from the Dead End Kids, Hunts Hall, who had created the character Satch Jones. On March 30th, 1981, only 3 months after John Lennon was murdered, John Hinckley attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan, who he shot with a revolver in order to impress actress Jodie Foster, who he had become obsessed with after she appeared in the movie Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. 2 months later, a Turkish mercenary escaped from prison and shot Pope John Paul II on May 13, 1981, in a failed assassination attempt on the Holy Leader. My mother and I spent a week on vacation at the trailer in Ocean City during the summer of 1981. Bartlett couldn't get off work, so he was still at home. On Wednesday, July 29, 1981, Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer in the wedding of the century. While my mom and I were at the beach, Bartlett, being the good little English lad, stayed up all night and watched the royal wedding while he was alone by himself in Baltimore. After the Baltimore Clippers finished in 4th place in the 1980-81 season, the rebooted Eastern League also folded. On September 26, 1981, Baltimore joined the Atlantic Coast Hockey League, which basically replaced the folded Eastern League. In order to avoid paying royalties to the guy who bought the rights to the team's name for $140 at the bankruptcy auction, the Baltimore Clippers changed its name to the Baltimore Skipjacks. The team was coached by Moose Lalo and made the playoffs, although they lost in the first round. Baltimore finally returned to the American Hockey League the following season when the American Hockey League's Erie Blades merged with the Atlantic Coast Hockey League's Baltimore Skipjacks. 20-year-old future American Hockey League Hall of Famer Mitch Lamoureux led the league with 57 goals and was named Rookie of the Year. Jimmy used to regularly attend the Skipjack games. The team was coached by Erie's former coach Louis Angotti, who gave Bartlett a pair of Mitch's skates. Bartlett never had to buy a ticket, of course, and he would only half-ass watch the games. He would just strut around the arena, visit the staff in the offices, say hi to the players in the dressing room, sign autographs for the fans, and talk to anyone and everyone, especially those who wanted to know when he was making his next comeback. One night after a Skipjacks game, Kelly received a phone call in the middle of the night from Bartlett. He was in jail. Here's what happened. He was sitting in the stands, and apparently he was blocking the view of one of the Skipjacks who hadn't dressed for that game but was sitting behind him. After his verbal request for Jimmy to move was ignored, the player then made the big mistake of tapping Bartlett on the shoulder, who immediately responded with a swift backhand to the mouth, dropping and embarrassing the young hockey player. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the player, just that he was one of the Skipjacks' young tough guys. When the police arrested Bartlett, he stiffened his arms and refused to allow himself to be handcuffed. Eventually, when he was in the police car being taken to jail, one of the cops finally recognized Jimmy and told him that if he had only known earlier it was Bartlett, he never would have arrested him. Kelly was really pissed at her husband, and she refused to pick him up from the pokey. After Jimmy was released on his own recognizance, Bartlett had a long walk home. On November 29, 1982, Michael Jackson released the groundbreaking album Thriller that remains the best-selling album of all time, having sold an estimated 70 million copies worldwide. After graduating from high school, I went to college at the University of Dayton in Ohio. Instead of being at the game, I could only watch it on TV in my freshman dorm room when on October 16, 1983, Scott McGregor shut out the Phillies 5-0, bringing Baltimore their third World Series championship in new manager Joe Altobelli's first season. Hall of Famers Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken were the stars for the O's, but it was catcher Rick Dempsey who was named Series MVP. I bet his family was happier this time. Gene Ubriaco replaced Louis Angotti as the Skipjacks coach for the 1983-84 season. Willie Marshall, Sandy McGregor, Jean-Marie Cassette, and Aldo Guillen were now just fading memories. A younger generation of Baltimore hockey fans now rooted for Mitch Lamoureux, feisty left-winger Gary Rissling, and defensemen Greg Tebbett and Phil Bourque. The Skipjacks also had Steve Carlson, who had played one of the Hanson brothers in Slapshot. But the most popular player on the team was their pugilistic defenseman, the 6'3" Bennett Wolf, who accumulated a staggering 349 penalty minutes that season. With Ubi behind the bench, the Skipjacks finished in first place with the best record in the American Hockey League. However, after sweeping Springfield in the first round of the playoffs, Baltimore was upset in 6 games in the second round to the Rochester Americans. Meanwhile, the NHL-owned Central Hockey League, which operated for 20 years as the top feeder league for the AHL, played its final season before folding and having its remaining teams swallowed up by the International League. Bartlett by now had accumulated enough seniority at the brewery so that he was no longer getting laid off all the time. Even though Jimmy would regularly attend the Skipjack games, Bartlett's dirty little secret was that he had developed a hatred for ice hockey. Bartlett was bitter about the way he was treated by the Clippers, and he was jealous of all the huge salaries that were paid to the players in the NHL, who he often said were not good enough to carry his stick. Willie Marshall and Jimmy Bartlett combined for 887 goals in the American Hockey League, and they were paid next to nothing. And no matter how well they played, they were stuck in the minors. Meanwhile, guys like Craig Cameron and Hilliard Graves had accomplished next to nothing while they were in Baltimore, but were rewarded with lucrative NHL careers. When I would ask him who was his favorite team or who his favorite player was, Bartlett would tell me he hated them all. Bartlett couldn't care less and didn't follow the Big Bad Bruins, Philly's Broad Street Bullies, Scotty Bowman's Flying Frenchmen, Potvin and Bossy's Islanders dynasty, or the Edmonton Oilers featuring the Great One. And he thought all the goalies were gutless for wearing masks. During the 70s and 80s, the NHL was very rarely shown on broadcast television, and Jimmy never attended a Washington Capitals game. So even if Bartlett wasn't completely overcome with envy, because Baltimore didn't have an NHL team, it would have been really difficult for him to follow the sport anyway. Even though Bartlett claimed to hate hockey, he still used to love to go to the skipjack games. He barely watched the games. I think he used to go because he missed the camaraderie and his teammates, but most of all, he missed being in the limelight. He loved going to the skipjack games because he wanted to be recognized. He loved it when fans asked him for an autograph. He loved to hear admirers gush about his playing days. Going to the games was a huge boost to his ego. On March 28, 1984, in the middle of the night, while the city of Baltimore slept and without any public announcement or warning, the most hated man in Baltimore history, Bob Irsay, owner of the beloved Baltimore Colts, packed up the team in secret in multiple tractor trailers and moved the team to Indianapolis. When we moved to Kearney in 1974, I met a kid in the 4th grade named Mike Edgar, who was easily the best artist in our class. When he was 9 years old, he could draw a cartoon of anyone in the style of Mad Magazine's artist Don Martin. We have remained best friends for more than 50 years. Mike would eventually graduate from Towson State with a degree in art. He would later join the Baltimore Watercolor Society and continues to be a talented professional artist and illustrator. By the mid-1980s, Mike had become almost like another member of the family, and my parents would take him everywhere with us. He would go to Ocean City with us on the weekends, and they would take him with us on trips to Hershey Park and Kings Dominion. Once we saw a young guy walking into one of those parks with a hot girl on each arm. Mike asked my dad, "Mr. Jim, how come I can't get a girlfriend and this guy gets 2? Without missing a beat, Bartlett responded while using his hands for measurement.
Because he's got a tongue this long and a whammer that long.
Once during a trip to Hershey Park, Bartlett had gotten into an argument with Kelly during the drive, and for whatever reason, he was fuming by the time we got to the park. When he was at his angriest, he would grit his teeth, clench his jaw, and would mutter to himself in a deep voice like some sort of demonic Yosemite Sam. "You motherfucking son of a bitch, fucking motherfucking son of a motherfucker." While Mike and I were riding the roller coasters, Bartlett just sat on a bench for hours and hours and just stewed. He never moved. He just sat there and simmered all day. We would go and check on him periodically. "Hey, Mr. Jim, get the fuck away from me." Another hour would go by. "Hey, Dad, you doing all right? Get away from me or I'm going to burn down the house with you and your mother in it." Although Bartlett was never violent with me or my mother, ever, and would never do anything like that, it was still pretty damn terrifying when he got that angry. One day, Bartlett, Mike, and I piled into the Mickey Mouse van in order to retrieve some stuff that was being stored at some friend's house. The guy who answered the door was a short, unassuming middle-aged man who was wearing a t-shirt and some sweatpants. I have no idea what color his shirt was because all of our eyes were immediately drawn to the massive 18-inch zucchini that was bulging in this guy's pants. As soon as we got in the van, Bartlett said what we were all thinking.
Jesus fucking Christ. Did you see the size of his fucking whammer?
In need of a sidekick, while I was away in college at the University of Dayton, my dad started taking Mike with him to the hockey games at the Civic Center. Once after one of the games, Bartlett and Mike went up to the coach's office. After Ubriaco hugged Jimmy and the two of them engaged in a minute of small talk, Jimmy abruptly asked,
"Hey, Ubi, where's my fucking bag?"
Gene tried to explain that he was sorry, but there weren't any extra equipment bags, but was interrupted by Bartlett.
"You promised me a bag. I want my fucking bag."
Bartlett demanded like he was some sort of mafia boss. So Ubriago went into the back and after several minutes emerged with an equipment bag for Bartlett that he had taken from another player, who he explained was injured and wouldn't be needing it anyway. There was a rookie on the Skipjacks that year during the 1984-85 season who reminded Ubi of Bartlett named Grant Sasser. Like Bartlett, he wears number 7, has a lot of shifty moves, and with his arms and stick raised high above his head, breaks into a dance on the toes of his skates after scoring a goal. Although Ubriaco liked the way Sass read plays and conducted himself on the fine points of hockey, What veteran Baltimore fans like most about him is the dance and prance he puts on after scoring a goal, just like Jimmy Bartlett. Unfortunately for Sasser, he would only score 5 goals in his professional career before hanging up his skates. Bartlett told Mike that the best place to watch the games was in the press box, which is located high up at the Civic Center's very top level. You could better see the ice and the development of the plays. But more importantly, the press box had free hot dogs and beer. Mike was a big guy who stood at least 6'3".
Hey, Mike, eat some hot dogs.
I already had some, Mr. Jim.
Hey, have some more. Eat up, they're free. They run out, they'll bring more. Have another beer. Drink up.
Eventually, one of the volunteer press box attendants came over and complained that Mike was consuming too many hot dogs and drinking too much beer. Bartlett unloaded on the volunteer with both barrels.
Who are you to tell my guests that they've had too much? You're a fucking nobody. You're just a flunky. Mike, have another fucking hot dog.
I'm okay, Mr. Jim.
I said have another fucking hot dog. Drink another fucking beer. Don't listen to this fucking guy. He's just a flunky. A fucking nobody.
During this time, they saw many of the best AHL players of the era. Rochester's Jody Gage, Springfield's Bruce Boudreau, Adirondacks' Glenn Murkowski, Sherbrooke's Murray Eves, and Hershey's Tim Tukey and Don Biggs. The 1984-85 Baltimore Skipjacks made it to the Calder Cup Finals, but were eliminated in 6 games by the Sherbrooke Canadians. After that, the Skipjacks would fall back into the cellar and would miss the playoffs in each of their next 4 seasons. On December 27, 1985, with the Baltimore Skipjacks sitting in last place, the Baltimore Sun made a tongue-in-cheek New Year's prediction that in February, Jimmy Bartlett would come out of retirement and Terry Reardon would be named the new coach and general manager. To celebrate the AHL's 50th anniversary, the Hockey News sent out ballots to determine the league's all-time All-Star team. Although he didn't win, according to the AHL's vice president, there were many, many write-in votes for former Baltimore skater Jimmy Bartlett. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded a minute into its flight, killing all 7 crew members aboard, including schoolteacher Krista McCullough. The tragedy was the first fatal in-flight accident involving an American spacecraft. On April 2, 1986, the remaining Clippers still living in Baltimore at the time, Jimmy Bartlett, Jill Boisvert, Kent Douglas, Terry Reardon, and Gump Embro, reunited for the last time in order to pay tribute to Woody Ryan, the Clippers' longtime promotions and sales manager, who sadly had lost both of his legs to diabetes. The National Brewers hockey team also had a reunion that year, and Jimmy gave his friend Sam Mattingly an autographed picture of himself in his Brewers sweater. According to his son Randy, for the rest of his life, Sam kept that autographed photo of Bartlett hanging in a very special place of honor, right next to his outer space thank you note selfie from Buzz Aldrin. On New Year's Eve, Terry Reardon's car was hit by a drunk driver in front of Calvert Hall High School, tragically taking the life of his longtime wife, Vivian. During their marriage, Jimmy always turned over his entire paycheck to Kelly, who completely controlled the family's finances. Bartlett never used a credit card or debit card. He never wrote a check. Instead, Kelly would give Jimmy a little bit of cash as spending money each week. Besides putting gas in his van, his biggest expenditure was playing the daily Pick 3 Lotto, which paid $500 whenever it hit. I graduated from the University of Dayton in May 1987. Bartlett bought me a class ring that was just from him as a graduation present. He could have easily just asked Kelly to write a check for it, but he didn't. Instead, he saved up a little of his spending money each week. But then again, maybe one of his horses came in. He always referred to betting as the track as investing, not gambling. Actually, since moving to Kearney, Jimmy's trips to the track were less frequent, but he still would go on occasion. On May 16, 1987, Bartlett, Mike, and I went to Pimlico and watched Ali Sheba win the 112th Preakness Stakes. Ali Sheba was ridden by Hall of Fame jockey Chris McCarron and was named the 42nd greatest racehorse of the 20th century by Blood Horse magazine. Each year, the public would bring their beach chairs and coolers, and a crowd of about 100,000 would be tightly packed into Pimlico's infield to watch the running of the second jewel of the Triple Crown. Bartlett had brought a cooler of beer with us, and we had tickets for a designated area that was sponsored by National Beer. In the middle of the afternoon, a long-haired hippie-looking guy tried to steal a beer from our cooler. With his arm still inside of the cooler, the thief let out a scream when Bartlett forcibly put his foot down on the cooler, trapping his arm inside, and then gave him a face rake. When the hippie guy's 6'4" buddy tried to render assistance, Bartlett successfully blocked his attempted punch with his left forearm and was about to pummel him before Mike and some other bystanders were able to pull everyone apart. On June 12, 1987, in a speech before the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, President Ronald Reagan invited the Soviet Union to take a step in rejecting authoritarianism and to instead embrace freedom. "Come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." By this time, Jimmy was middle-aged and was enjoying the simple life living in suburbia. Jim and Kelly would play double-deck pinochle, and they would go on Caribbean cruises with their friends Linda and Stanley. Jim and Kelly would invite their friends Will and Sue over, and the neighbors Debbie and Brian and Mike and his parents to the house for cookouts, while the kids would play bocce ball and cornhole in the backyard. JJ had joined the Navy, and Melinda had gotten married, and Bartlett was now a proud grandfather of 3. Jimmy had finally adjusted to a life that was no longer spent basking in the limelight. President Reagan hated large government and thought it was a waste of taxpayer dollars for thousands of federal workers to be employed at Social Security National Headquarters in Woodlawn. In 1987, Reagan created a program in order to relocate many workers from headquarters to the field. Anyone who was willing to enter the program would be trained as a claims representative and would be relocated to any office of their choice without a decrease in pay. My mother could have chosen Hawaii, California, or the U.S. Virgin Islands if she wanted. The government would also pay all moving and relocation costs and would even pay fair market value for your house in case it didn't sell. Because my parents always dreamed of one day retiring to Florida, my mother requested to be transferred to Clearwater. Jimmy never had a problem allowing Kelly to make all the major family decisions. Although Bartlett finally had acquired enough seniority at the brewery so he finally wasn't going to get laid off all the time anymore, he gladly quit his job at National Beer as the 3 of us left Baltimore for Tampa Bay. In 1996, the rights of National Bohemian were sold and the iconic beer is no longer brewed in Baltimore. Jimmy was 55 years old when we moved to sunny FLA in July 1987, but his life story still had one more unexpected twist that nobody could have predicted.